My name is Clara Hamilton. I'm 35 years old, a graphic designer, and I live with my husband Ethan in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. We have a small ranch-style house on a tree-lined street, not far from Washington Park. Visitors often comment on how idyllic it is, almost too perfect. A manicured front lawn with rose bushes, clean white window frames, a house that looks like it's straight out of a real estate magazine. But behind the neat facade, it's not as perfect as it seems. Ethan and I have been married for 16 years. We married very young. I was 19, he was 22. Back then, I was convinced we were destined to be together. He was my first serious boyfriend, my first love, my forever. Our wedding was a small ceremony in a local church in my hometown in rural Oregon. All our relatives were there. I remember thinking, this is what happiness feels like, and it will last forever. The forever part has stuck, at least on paper. In reality, it has often been different. Ethan works in the film industry, mainly as a production manager. He's constantly traveling on location, late nights, receptions, meetings. I used to be excited by his energy, his stories from the set, the glamorous names he mentioned. Over the years, however, I started to wonder more and more if that world was driving us apart. I'm much more of a homebody. As a graphic designer, I work a lot from home, often alone, immersed in designs and campaigns for Portland-based agencies. We don't have children. Initially, it was a conscious decision because we both wanted to focus on our careers. Later, when the time might have been right, we felt it had passed. Sometimes I regret it, but sometimes I also feel a quiet relief. Our marriage is a mix of closeness and distance. We still laugh, share many habits. But something is missing. A feeling of peacefulness, an unshakable trust, the kind I once imagined we would have. That Saturday morning I woke up before Ethan. The sun cast bright streaks on the bedroom wall, and I lay still, listening to his quiet breathing. I wondered if he ever stayed awake thinking about us. I finally got up, put on my robe, and went to the kitchen. The smell of coffee, the hum of the machine. Small rituals that gave me a sense of connection. While waiting, I checked my phone. A message from my best friend Sarah. "Hey, how's your movie star?" Phone in hand again. "Come to the farmer's market with me today. You need a distraction." She always called him a movie star, even though he wasn't, only in the sense that he worked among them. Sarah had often hinted that she didn't trust him. Too many pretty colleagues, too many late nights out, she would say. I had always ignored it. But that morning, with a cup of freshly brewed coffee in my hand, I felt those doubts gnawing at me again. "Morning." I finally heard Ethan from the hallway. He walked into the kitchen, sleepy and only in his boxers, and the first thing he grabbed was his phone. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound normal. "Everything all right?" he asked, staring at his screen. "Yes, all good." I sipped my coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. "I just have to check some emails quickly," he muttered. Los Angeles was exhausting. Everything always piles up. "Sure," I said. But inside I was thinking, always that phone, always that job. He noticed my tone and looked up. "What?" "Nothing, Clara," he sighed. "We've talked about this. I'm not doing this to ignore you. It's my job." I forced a smile. "I know. I'm just going to clean the bathroom quickly." "Clean again?" He chuckled briefly, shaking his head. "You're crazy. Saturday morning, and you want to scrub tiles. Someone has to. We should have breakfast first." In a minute. I started cleaning the bathroom mechanically as always. And then I saw it. A blonde hair in our shower. Fine light, not mine and not his. In that moment, everything I had only vaguely sensed before. Distrust, uncertainty, distance, became real. A small, insignificant piece of evidence, but sharp as a knife. I looked at the hair in my gloved hand as if I had found proof of a crime. Thin, almost translucent in the light, but definitely blonde. My breathing quickened. I have dark hair, Ethan has dark hair. We live alone. I felt hot under my rubber gloves. I held the hair, looked at it one more time, and then quickly threw it in the trash, as if I could erase it from my mind too. but the image remained etched. "Clara," Ethan's voice from the kitchen. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I replied, too quickly, too sharply. A few seconds later he was in the doorway, a coffee cup in his hand. His hair messy, still sleepy. "You look strange." I forced myself to appear calm. "I'm fine. Just quickly cleaning up." He came a step closer. "You're pale. Don't you want to sit down?" I forced a smile. "No, it's fine. I'll be done in a minute." Ethan studied me, then raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but please don't stress so much about cleaning. Sometimes you overdo it." "It just needs to be done," I replied, wiping the shower wall right where the blonde hair had been stuck moments before. He put his cup on the edge of the sink, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Honey, it's the weekend. Let's have breakfast." I looked at him. There was something warm and familiar in his dark eyes, but at the same time, there was that distance that had been unsettling me for the past few months. "In a minute," I murmured. "I'll be done in a second." At the breakfast table, the atmosphere was strange. Ethan was scrambling eggs, stirring them in the pan as if everything was normal. I sat with my coffee cup, watching his every move, the ease with which he moved, as if he had nothing to hide. "So," he began, putting the pan on the table, "I thought we could go for a walk in Washington Park today. Just the two of us. Relax a bit." "Sounds great," I said automatically. But my thoughts immediately wandered. Just the two of us. Or had someone else been here recently? I reached for the salt shaker, but put it down because my hands were shaking slightly. Ethan noticed. "Are you all right?" "Yes, of course." He put down his fork. "You seem tense. Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath. Now or never, I thought. But how do you say something like, "Hey, I just found a blonde hair in our shower. Can you explain that?" Instead I asked, "Hey, did you shower last night after I had already gone to bed?" He blinked, confused. "Yes, why?" "No reason." I tried to sound casual. "I just noticed the bathroom was very humid this morning." "Ah." He picked up his fork, chewing. "Yes, it was late. I was sweaty from the trip back from Los Angeles." I nodded, looking at my scrambled eggs, but barely ate anything. After a while I asked, "And how was Los Angeles?" "Stressful as usual," he replied with a shrug. "Long days, chaotic crew. But at least the premiere was well attended. The press was there too." "Did you see any colleagues you already knew?" I asked, trying to sound overly casual. He chuckled softly. "Colleagues? Why do you ask like that?" "Just curious." "Yeah, sure. You always run into people. It's a small business." "Why?" I took a sip of coffee. My heart was pounding. "Nothing." He put down his fork, looking at me inquisitively. "Clara, if something is bothering you, tell me. We've been married for 16 years. I can tell when something is wrong." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, really." He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but you know you can talk to me about anything." "Can I?" I thought. After breakfast he cleared the dishes. I remained at the table, staring into space. The blonde hair wouldn't leave me alone. The more I thought about it, the less I could dismiss it as a coincidence. Images formed in my head. Another woman in our shower, laughing as Ethan handed her my shampoo. Blonde, confident, a stranger. I felt my throat close up. As Ethan put the dishes in the dishwasher, he said, "Your mind seems a million miles away." I forced a calm tone. "Just a lot on my mind. Work, Sarah, all kinds of things." He nodded, accepting it. But I knew from that moment on that I would start looking more closely. The days following the discovery of the blonde hair felt strange. It was as if the world had shifted just a bit and suddenly everything was out of balance. On the surface, our daily routine was the same. Ethan worked a lot, made calls, wrote emails, went out for appointments. In the evenings, we sat together at the table, ate, and talked about trivial things. But for me, every sentence, every movement, every little gesture had taken on a new meaning. I noticed that he had recently started placing his phone face down on the table. Before it was face up and I could see when a message came in. Now it remained hidden. I noticed that he stayed longer in the bathroom at night. The water ran, the fan whirred. Sometimes I heard him humming. Before I didn't care. Now I wondered who he was showering for with such care when I was already in my pajamas. I noticed that he shaved more often, even on days when he was supposedly just doing office work. All small things. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe not. At night I lay awake next to him. He slept deeply, his breathing steady, sometimes a soft snore. I stared into the darkness and wondered if I was going crazy, if I was looking for something that wasn't there, or if, on the contrary, I had been looking away for too long. 2 days later I texted Sarah, my best friend. I didn't actually want to tell her anything, but it was burning in my chest. Coffee time. Need a distraction, she replied immediately. Stumptown coffee, 4 p.m. We met at the Stumptown in the Pearl District. It was crowded as usual. The smell of fresh pastries drifted through the air. Tourists were lining up. Sarah was already sitting by the window, blonde, energetic as always. There you are, she said as I sat down. You look tense. I waved my hand dismissively, forcing a smile. Too much work. She raised an eyebrow. Or too much, Ethan? Nothing, I said, taking a sip of my cappuccino. It's all right, she said after a while. You don't have to tell me, but you know I can see it on your face. I looked at my cup, stirring the foam with my spoon. It's nothing concrete, just little things. Little things, she repeated. He nodded. You know, when you suddenly start noticing things you never paid attention to before. A different perfume. Coming home late. A phone face down on the table. She didn't say anything, but I felt her gaze. Maybe I'm just imagining it, I continued, my voice quieter. Maybe I'm seeing ghosts. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, slowly putting the cup down. Ghosts aren't usually ghosts, she murmured. Sometimes it's just what's been in the room all along. I looked up. Do you mean? She shrugged. I don't mean anything. I'm just saying you should look closer. We fell silent. Outside, crowds of people passed by with shopping bags in their arms, laughter, a mix of voices. I felt like I was behind glass, separated from that normality. You know him, Sarah said finally, her voice softer. You can tell when someone is different, when they suddenly have secrets. You're not stupid. I nodded, but the knot in my throat only grew tighter. On the way home, I walked through the narrow streets, the sounds of the city around me. But inside I was calm. Her words resonated. You can tell when someone is different. And indeed I started registering everything. How Ethan smelled of a different soap we had never bought. How sometimes he smiled absent-mindedly when he looked at his phone. How he chose his clothes more carefully than before, even when he was supposedly just going to the office. I didn't say anything. I just collected every detail, every deviation. An invisible log was being compiled in my head. But the more I saw, the clearer it became. It was no longer just my imagination. Something was going on, and I had to find out what it was. It started with a small thing I almost missed. My shampoo. I had been using the same one for years. A thick, dark liquid with a herbal scent that always gave me a feeling of stability. Ethan didn't particularly like the smell. He had his own neutral body wash. Always the same. We had this division for years. My shelf, his shelf, like two small territories we never questioned. But one night when I was showering, I noticed the bottle felt lighter. I shook it, and sure enough, it was at least a third emptier than it should have been. I'd just bought it. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I had underestimated the amount. Maybe I had been wasteful. But over the next few days I paid closer attention. I always put the bottle back in the same spot, subtly marking a line on the plastic with my fingernail. And then, after 3 days, it was clear. The shampoo was being used up without my help. A shiver ran down my spine. Ethan hated that smell. He had never touched it, never even tried it. Why would he suddenly use mine? It was a strange pattern. Someone else had to have been here. I stood in the bathroom one morning, the bottle in my hand, staring at the content that was diminishing too quickly. The fluorescent lamp light reflected off the plastic. My heart was pounding in my temples. She was here, whoever she is. She stood here in my shower, washed her hair while I was perhaps sitting in the living room or lying in bed. She used my shampoo. The idea clenched my throat. This was no longer just a loose blonde hair that could still be explained away. This was more intimate, more direct. Someone had taken my place, touched my things, adopted my scent. I felt displaced in my own home. During the day, I tried not to show anything. Ethan worked as usual, made calls, laughed at some joke on the other end of the line, but I saw him differently now. Every time he passed by me, I smelled him, trying to catch a trace of my shampoo, but there was nothing. He wasn't using it. So who was? Night I saw Sarah again. It wasn't planned this time, but because she called me. Fancy a glass of wine. I'm downtown. I accepted, simply because I couldn't bear to carry it all alone anymore. We sat in a small, dimly lit bar on Division Street, candles on the tables, and the conversations of other guests as a soft murmur in the background. I told her about the shampoo, cautiously, almost with shame, as if it were a ridiculous detail. She listened, arms crossed, her expression serious. So, she said after a while, either he's using it in secret or someone else used it. Exactly, I muttered. And you don't think it was him? I shook my head. He can't stand the smell. He never touched it. Never. She took a sip of wine. She slowly set the glass down. Then you know what that means. I fell silent. There was a storm raging inside me, but I couldn't put it into words. Clara, Sarah said, her voice softer, you're no longer looking for signs. You already found them. Her words resonated as I held the glass in my hands. I wanted to disagree. I wanted to say that everything could have a harmless explanation, but I couldn't find one. Later, alone in bed, I stared into the darkness. Ethan lay next to me, sleeping soundly and steadily. I listened to his breathing, felt the warmth of his shoulder, and yet I felt lonelier than ever. The shampoo, the hair, the late nights. The evidence was forming a pattern. And for the first time a decision formed within me, dark and quiet. If I couldn't get the truth the easy way, I would get it myself. The idea wouldn't leave me alone. Day after day, I watched the shampoo bottle empty. Invisible evidence that no one but me could notice. I felt like a detective in my own home and at the same time like a lunatic. At night I lay awake, turning over the possibilities. I could confront Ethan directly. I could ask him openly, without beating around the bush. But what if he denied it? What if he made me look paranoid? Then I would be left alone with my uncertainty, with no proof. I needed clarity. And I needed it in a way he couldn't deny. The idea came to me suddenly, almost like a joke. What if someone else is using my shampoo and I manipulate it so that it doesn't go unnoticed? I chuckled softly, then scolded myself. But the idea stuck. It gnawed at me, and finally it was no longer a joke, but a plan. The next morning I went to the drugstore on Burnside Street. It was a gray, normal weekday. The shelves were full. Women with baskets. Men standing perplexed in front of the razors. I pushed my shopping cart as usual, grabbing cleaning supplies, toothpaste, a new pack of cotton pads, and then I stopped in front of the shelf with hair removal creams. I hesitated, feeling myself get warm. What was I doing? I looked around, almost as if my guilt was written all over my face. No one was paying attention to me. A woman was looking for shampoo for dry hair. A man put 2 bottles of body wash in his basket. I picked up a tube of hair removal cream, tucked it between laundry detergent and paper towels. My heart was pounding as if I had stolen something forbidden. At home, I waited for Ethan to disappear into his office. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door behind me, and placed the shampoo bottle in the sink. I took the tube of hair removal cream out of the bag, carefully opened the cap. The smell was strong, chemical, completely different from the familiar herbal scent of my shampoo. With trembling hands, I poured the liquid into the shampoo bottle, carefully, slowly, so that nothing spilled. I mixed it, shook it until the consistency was somewhat similar. Then I put the bottle back in its place. I washed my hands, wiped the sink as if any trace would be a giveaway. My heart was beating so fast I was sure Ethan could hear me outside. When I was done, I leaned against the cold tiles and took a deep breath. Later at dinner I looked at him as he ate, as he spoke casually about the new shoot. I nodded, asked questions, laughed at the right moments. No one would have guessed that I had just done something that transformed me into a different woman. No longer the understanding wife, but a woman in search of the truth. But inside there was a storm. What if I had gone too far? What if it's true and she comes back? What if I suddenly get a certainty that I can't shake off? That night I lay awake while Ethan slept next to me. I stared at the ceiling and waited. I waited for what was about to happen. It was as if I had set a trap and was now standing next to it, motionless, waiting for someone to fall into it. The shampoo bottle stood in its place, apparently inconspicuous as always. But I knew what lurked inside, and that knowledge followed me with every trip to the bathroom, with every look into the shower, with every sound that came from the hallway. The first 2 days nothing happened. Or rather, nothing that I noticed. I checked the bottle almost compulsively, lifting it, turning it, carefully shaking it. The content seemed unchanged. Maybe no one had used it. Maybe it was gone. But my heart beat faster every time Ethan went to shower. I stayed in the kitchen then, listening to the water, imagining him unscrewing the cap, massaging the foam into his hair. And at the same time I knew he hated the smell. It wasn't his shampoo. So I waited. Not for him, for her. During those days my daily life was like a shadow play. I worked on my graphic projects, clicked on emails, edited designs, but everything happened mechanically, without concentration. In truth, my mind was only in the bathroom. In the evenings I sat with Ethan on the sofa. We watched a TV show. He laughed at the right moments, made me popcorn, put his arm around me, and I thought, maybe it really is just my imagination. Maybe she doesn't exist. Maybe I'm the one who's lost here. But then he went to his office and I used the opportunity to check the bathroom. The same scene over and over. Me alone, the bottle in my hand, checking if it had lightened. And then, on the 4th day, it happened. It was in the afternoon. Ethan was supposedly in the office. I went into the bathroom almost casually and stopped. The bottle was clearly lighter. I lifted it, feeling the difference. My fingernail mark, which I had set as a reference point, confirmed it. At least 2 finger widths were missing. My stomach clenched. Someone had used it. Someone had been here. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, looking at the bottle in my hand. The air was charged. Felt dizzy. This was no longer a vague feeling. It was no longer a hair that could be dismissed as a coincidence. This was concrete. She had been here in my bathroom under my water with my shampoo and now with hair removal cream on her head. I felt sick with excitement. That night I could barely sleep. I stayed awake, listening to every sound. Ethan was sleeping quietly next to me, turning over once in his sleep. I stared into the darkness and imagined scenes. A strange woman coming out of the shower with a desperate cry. Handfuls of hair in her hands. I was scared of myself. What was I doing here? What if I had gone too far? And yet, a part of me felt stronger, more determined, as if I had regained control. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. It started with a coincidence. Or maybe not. Maybe it was fate that decided to lift the veil. It was a Thursday night. I had the TV on in the background while I was working on my laptop. Ethan was once again not at home, supposedly for a long production meeting. I had long since become accustomed to the fact that he was more often out than here. The news was on, and I was barely listening, until suddenly a name appeared that made me prick up my ears. Vivian Shaw, actress, blonde, flawless, one of those faces everyone knew in America. I looked up and froze. She was on the screen, accompanied by camera flashes in front of a premiere cinema in Los Angeles. But she didn't look like she usually did. Her head was bald, smoothly shaved, no hair, no trace of it, nothing. Just a shiny, pale scalp under the glare of the spotlights. Reporters were going wild, talking about a mysterious incident, a scandal behind the scenes. Vivian Shaw looked nervous. She wore a scarf that kept slipping, and she dodged all questions. I held my breath. My fingers froze on the keyboard. One thought shot through my mind so clear it scared me. Shampoo. I couldn't stop looking. There she was, this woman, suddenly hairless. And in that moment, I knew without a doubt, without escape. It was her. She had been in my bathroom. She had used my shampoo. The following days were a blur of news, tabloids, and headlines. Vivian Shaw with the bald head. Coincidence or scandal? What is behind the actress's sudden hair loss? Photos everywhere. Vivian with a wig, Vivian with a scarf. Vivian chasing away the cameras. I skimmed the newspapers, looked at the photos, and felt a mixture of triumph, disgust, and fear. The truth was right in front of me. All of America could see it. Only Ethan said nothing. He came home late, seemed nervous, avoiding my gaze. His answers were shorter than usual. He talked quickly about work, as if he wanted to fill a void with words. I watched him silently. There was an expression on his face that I knew. The struggle between guilt and concealment. And then, one evening, we were having dinner when he suddenly stopped. His cutlery lay still on the plate, and he looked at me long and searchingly. "Clara," he began. Then he broke off. I held his gaze. "What?" I asked calmly, almost coldly. "Nothing," he muttered and lowered his head. But I knew it. He suspected that I knew. The next morning there was a newspaper in the mailbox with a photo of Vivian Shaw on the front page. The article speculated whether her sudden hair loss had health-related reasons or whether there was a malicious prank behind it. I picked up the newspaper, deliberately placed it on the kitchen table, right between our coffee cups. Ethan came in, poured himself coffee, and his gaze immediately fell on the front page. A barely perceptible twitch crossed his face, and he grabbed the cup as if it had suddenly become essential for survival. I watched him in silence, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup. Say something, I thought. Admit it or lie, but do something. But he did nothing. He remained silent, and in that silence, a resolution grew inside me. If he wouldn't speak, then I would. And not just privately. I would make the truth public. Just as he had ignored me for years, now I would make sure all of America saw what was really behind his job. It felt like I had been holding my breath for days. Since the hair, since the shampoo, since the headlines about Vivian Shaw, I had been silent. I had watched Ethan pretend that everything was normal, as if 16 years of marriage could simply be covered up with silence. But inside, something had risen in me, bigger than fear, stronger than shame, the will to hear the truth. That Tuesday evening I couldn't stand it anymore. Ethan was sitting in the living room in his favorite armchair, a glass of red wine next to him. The lamp cast a warm light that made him look almost peaceful. A script was open on the coffee table, but I knew he wasn't reading it. His fingers turned the pages, but his eyes were empty. I stood in the doorway, listened to my heart pound and said, "We need to talk." He looked up, startled, almost annoyed. "Clara, please, not now. I'm tired." "No." My voice trembled, but I stood my ground. "Right now." Slowly he put the script aside. "What is it?" I walked in, sat down opposite him, and felt my hands getting clammy. I squeezed them into fists so he wouldn't see the trembling. "For weeks," I began, "something has been wrong between us. You're different, distant, withdrawn." I took a deep breath. "And then I find blonde hair in our shower. Hair that is not ours." He blinked. His face froze. Not a word. Just a brief muscle twitching in his jaw. "Clara," he spoke softly, as if to appease me. "It's not what you think." I laughed dryly. "It's not what I think. Then I'm not blind. I saw my shampoo empty and empty. I know someone else was here, in my bathroom, in my shower." I picked up the newspaper from the table, which I had deliberately put there, and pushed it towards him. On the front page, Vivian Shaw with a scarf, the headline. Star loses hair, sabotage or illness? He stared at the photo, then at me. For a moment, his face was a mask, immobile, empty. Then he only said, "Say it," I demanded, my voice now sharp and clear. "Tell me to my face. Be honest, just once." He bowed his head, running both hands over his face. For a moment, only his breathing could be heard. Then he looked up, and in his eyes was something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. "It happened," he whispered. Felt a chill. I felt my hands shake, my throat closing up. It happened. So simple, so easy to say, as if it had been a mistake, a small misstep. "How long?" I asked with a tight voice. He remained silent. "How long?" I slammed my fist on the table. The glass rattled. He looked at me almost pleadingly, then lowered his gaze. "A few months. A few months." I laughed bitterly. A few months where she was in my bathroom, used my shampoo, washed her hair in my shower while I was probably sitting in the living room in my house. Tears burned my eyes, but I held his gaze. "And you didn't say anything. You looked at me as if everything was fine. You lied to me day after day." He got up, wanting to approach me, but I stepped back. "Clara, please. It was a mistake. A bloody mistake. I didn't want this. I love you. Love." My voice broke. "Do you even dare to say that word? Love is trust. Love is respect. Love means that I shouldn't have to feel like a stranger in my own home." He reached out his hand to me, but I tore myself away. 16 years, Ethan. Believed in you. I trusted you. I spent my youth with you, my dreams, my hope. And for what? So you could replace me with some actress because she's blonde and glamorous. He swallowed, his eyes shining. "No. It wasn't planned. It just happened. It just happened." I felt the tears run down my face. "It just happened that you lied to me. Just happened that you tore my heart out. It just happened that you turned our marriage into a play." A fight followed that lasted for hours. I screamed. He was silent. Then he screamed. And I was silent. We threw things at each other that we could never take back. I heard myself say words I never thought possible. "You are a stranger to me. I despise you. 16 years for nothing." And in between, moments when we both cried, when we looked at each other and recognized what had once been in each other's eyes. But it was only a shadow, an echo. And an echo is not enough to save a marriage. The next day I went to a law firm, a simple office downtown. Gray carpet, white walls, files on the shelves. The lawyer listened to me calmly as I spoke. It was difficult for me to say the words, and yet it felt good. "We will file for divorce," she said calmly. "And if you want, we can have the press on your side." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Yes, I want that." On the way home, on the crowded subway, I cried silently. Not loudly, not visibly, just quiet tears running down my cheeks. No one noticed. And maybe that was fitting because our marriage, our story, had not been noticed by anyone either except by me. But while the city rushed past me, I felt something else. A new clarity. It was over. And sometimes an end also means a new beginning. The morning I took the newspaper out of the mailbox, I felt as if I had a bomb in my hands. The headline jumped out at me. "Infidelity Scandal, Baldness. The Secret Truth Behind Vivian's Hair Loss." Below, my name in black and white. "Clara Hamilton, wife of production manager Ethan Hamilton, speaks out." My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. There it was. My story, my words. "I've been quiet for too long. You can't end 16 years of marriage with a lie. I want the truth to come out." I looked at the lines that had come out of my mouth and felt a pang in my chest. On the one hand, a triumph. The truth was no longer just my dark secret. On the other, shame because the whole city could read about it. 2 days earlier, I had been sitting in a cafe on Hawthorne Street when Ryan Cole stood in front of me. He was taller than I had imagined, thin, with a dark coat and a gaze that immediately resonated with me. Not a nosy, greedy look, as you would expect from a reporter, but serious, respectful, as if he wanted to reassure me. "I'm listening to you, all of you, Ms. Hamilton." He held out his hand to me, his grip firm, warm. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, uncertain, my hands clammy. My heart was pounding. I had never confided such intimate things to a stranger before. We sat down at a small table in the corner. The cafe was crowded, a mixture of voices, the scent of pastries. I felt like I was in a bubble, separated from everything. "I've been writing about celebrities, scandals, and infidelity for 15 years, Ryan began, his notepad in front of him. "But I don't want to exploit your story. I want it to be told in your words." Something in me relaxed at his words. I nodded, took a deep breath, and started talking. I told him about that Saturday morning, about the blonde hair in the shower, about how I wanted to suppress it at first, but how it had gnawed at me. I talked about the nights I stayed awake while Ethan breathed calmly next to me, unsure if I was paranoid or if I was finally waking up. I told him about the shampoo that emptied and emptied, about my secret mark on the bottle, about the decision to put the hair removal cream in it. As I spoke, Ryan looked at me, calm, focused, with a seriousness that sometimes made me stop. He took notes, but never frantically. He didn't interrupt me. He only asked quietly for more details if he needed to understand something more precisely. And then I said, finally, my voice breaking. I was sitting in front of the TV, and there she was, Vivian Shaw, hairless. All of America was talking about it, and I knew she had been in my shower. Tears ran down my face. I hadn't planned to cry, but it poured out of me. Ryan silently handed me a napkin. Not a face of pity, nor feigned regret, just a calm presence. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said after a long pause. "But you should know, if we publish this, there's no turning back. It's going to cause an uproar. You will face attacks, doubts, ridicule, but also respect. Are you ready?" I wiped my tears. "Yes," I whispered. "I've been quiet for too long." And now, 2 days later, I was sitting in my kitchen, the newspaper in my hand, my coffee untouched. I read the lines over and over, my name, my words, the public. One part of me rejoiced. I was no longer the silent wife in the background. Finally had a voice. Another part of me tensed up. Now everyone knew what had happened. My neighbors, the barista, maybe even people I hadn't seen since high school. When I went to the cafe shortly after, I felt people looking at me longer. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe not. The barista smiled kindly, but her eyes lingered on my face longer than usual. 2 men whispered as I walked past. I pulled my scarf tighter around me, wishing I was invisible. And at the same time, no, that's exactly what I no longer wanted. I wanted to be seen, to be heard. That night my phone rang. It was Ryan. I hesitated, then finally answered. "Ms. Hamilton." His voice was calm, warm. "I wanted to thank you. The article is out and is being widely discussed. But you know what? Many readers are writing that they see themselves in your story, that they want to be brave enough to stop being silent." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Do you really mean that?" "Yes," he said. "I often write about scandals that are empty, that are just for the headlines. But your story, that's real. It has meaning." I held the phone to my ear, silently, and felt a tug in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't just feel anger or pain, but also something else. A kind of warmth, a feeling of being understood in those words. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "No," he replied, "thank you." That night I fell asleep with the newspaper on my nightstand. My name was plastered on the front page. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel loss, but also the idea that my life could start anew. And maybe, just maybe, that new beginning had already started with a phone call. The weeks after the publication were a whirlwind. The divorce had been filed. My name was in the papers, and neighbors looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. I moved between 2 worlds, the old broken marriage and the new one, which didn't have solid ground yet. In the midst of it all, Ryan reached out, not as a reporter, but as a person. "Ms. Hamilton," he wrote in a message, I know you have a lot on your plate right now, but if you ever want to grab a coffee without a notepad or notes, let me know. I stared at those lines for a long time. One part of me wanted to answer yes right away. The other whispered, "You're hurt, vulnerable. Don't let anyone get that close." But I finally replied, "I'd love to." We met again at a small cafe in the West End. It was a gray afternoon. A drizzle hung in the air. Ryan was already sitting by the window, a newspaper next to him, this time not in his work persona, but simply in a wool sweater. "Clara," he greeted me. And it was the first time he had said my name without a title. Sounded easy, warm. We talked for a long time. First about mundane things. Portland, the winter, the best cappuccino in the city. Then about difficult things. "It's strange," I said at one point. "When you read your life in a newspaper, it suddenly belongs to everyone and less to yourself." He nodded. "And at the same time it sets you free, because you no longer have to hide anything." I fell silent, watching the raindrops run down the window. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll never be able to trust again." "Maybe," he replied. "It's not about trusting again right away, but about finding someone who is patient, who waits until you're ready." His words hit me deeper than I expected. We met again. A walk through Washington Park, where we laughed when a dog suddenly jumped into the river. A movie night where we sat silently next to each other, our hands almost touching but not quite. It wasn't anything official, nothing tangible. But it was a feeling, a whisper that there might be something more if I found the courage. One night alone at home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I saw my own face, my dark hair, my eyes that had cried so much, and I said to myself quietly, "I am no longer the woman who just waited. I am no longer the one who remained silent. I am more." And I believed it for the first time. The divorce was not yet final. My heart was still full of scars. But I felt that this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new life. Sometimes you need a break to find yourself again. Sometimes something has to break to make room for something new. And sometimes it's not the years you thought you lost, but the strength you gain with them. I didn't know where my path with Ryan would lead. Maybe just to a friendship, maybe to something bigger. But I knew I had learned that you can't remain silent when the truth is screaming inside you. Because silence destroys, but the truth sets you free. Several months had passed since my world had fallen apart. Winter was behind us, and with spring, something returned that I hadn't felt for a long time. Hope. The days grew brighter. The magnolias in Portland were in bloom, and I noticed that a new life was also awakening in me. The divorce was now final, a practical letter from the court, a pile of papers that sealed and ended 16 years of marriage. I had cried, yes, but it was no longer a collapse. It was more of a quiet letting go. Ethan had disappeared from my life like a shadow. Sometimes I still saw his name in articles, film projects, premieres, the same world that had once brought us together. But it no longer belonged to me. I didn't know if he was still seeing Vivian. And for the first time, I genuinely didn't care. I rarely heard anything about Vivian anymore. She had retired, they said. When I saw her photo in magazines, I no longer felt anything. Neither triumph nor anger. Just a neutral shrug. And I had learned that you are stronger than you think, that even after deep breaks you move forward. Sometimes slower, sometimes more cautiously, but always forward.